Hello everybody, my name's Wolf. If this is your first time here, this is where I explain the crazy, over-the-top world of Warhammer 40,000 that nerds like me love so much. In this particular series, we're looking at the combat patrol boxes and what to do with them. So, settle in, grab a drink, and prepare for a Noob-Splaining session. So, welcome back everybody, and here we go with the next instalment of the Chaos-themed combat patrol guides. This week we're taking a look at the most warp-infused, Egyptian-themed combat patrol box there is, which is of course the 15th Legion, the Thousand Suns. This week's shout out goes out to Alana, who is all the way over in Los Angeles. So, hey Alana, I hope you enjoy the video. Now if you want a shout out in one of my videos, then just click the email link in the video description. Doesn't cost you anything, but if you would like to buy me a coffee, you can, and it helps me keep the content fresh and regular. I know some of my videos have had advertisements at the time of recording. The channel isn't even halfway to being monetized, so I'm not earning off them. Also, don't forget about my links to Baron of Dice and Element Games. Right, shameless plug over, let's crack on with this week's video, as it turns out this is going to be a bit of a long one. Now, when Emperor Chris started to form his 15th Legion, he mandated that every Space Marine recruit who has some form of psycho powers, making them known as librarians, which is basically the 40k version of a space wizard, they were to be drafted into the 15th Legion, making the entire Legion all librarians or psychers of varying levels of powers. As well as having the genetic enhancements of being Astartes, being able to wear power armor and using bolters and chainswords, they could also fry your ass with warp lightning and other such skills or spells. Now the 15th Legion were extremely honourable, but suffered from something called the flesh change, where during moments of extreme emotional stress, for example like in combat, they would suffer spontaneous horrific genetic mutations, and in a desire to keep the secret lest they all be put down, they would kill any member of their Legion who suffered from a flesh change, and dispose of the body so nobody would know. As more and more of the Legion fell to the flesh change and their numbers started to dwindle quite rapidly, they developed something called the renumerations, which is basically a meditative technique to help them control their emotions and also enhance their psychic abilities. Now, there are lots of different types of psychic abilities in 40k, from obvious offensive ones like hurling lightning about, being able to telekinetically control objects and also hurl fire, to things less offensive like healing, divination of the future, or being able to telepathically control weaker-minded individuals. However, unlike the Jedi or wizards of other settings, who were all taught to use all the powers, the 15th Legion was organised at first into 10 cabals, each of 1,000 Marines, with each cabal specialising in just one of the psychic abilities, so they could all train together in the same thing and so as not to get overwhelmed and suffer from the flesh change. At their peak, they only had 10,000 Space Marines, which is really small for a Space Marine Legion, as all the rest had at least 50,000, with some having over 100,000 and Guilliman's Ultramarines clocking in at nearly 250,000. But because of their psychic powers, they were considered to be one of the most powerful legions, as they could deal with Xenos races that were immune to conventional weapons. During the Crusade, however, they got into a particularly nasty campaign and had their numbers absolutely decimated, and one of the cabals completely destroyed, never to be replaced. At this point, the flesh change was also running rampant, and they were on the very verge of destruction. Then their Primarch, Magnus the Red-Skinned Psyker, was found and reunited with what was left of his legion. Emperor Chris offered to make him a new legion, but Magnus refused and was determined to stop the flesh change. So Emperor Chris just shrugged his shoulders and fucked off to continue the crusade and finding the other missing Primarchs. So for the Thousand Suns, getting their Primarch back was a good thing, right? Wrong. Very fucking wrong, because at this point onwards, Magnus fucked everything up that he possibly could for his legion. I can almost hear the fanboys crying now.
But Magnus did nothing wrong.
Yes, he fucking did, and if anyone tries to tell you that bullshit, treat them like a flat earther and assume they know fuck all. To start with, he psychically projected himself into the Great Ocean, as he called it, and fought a battle with a malevolent presence there, which cost him one of his eyes, but he was able to stop the flesh change. With this victory, he became more and more arrogant in his sureness of his control of his psychic mastery and encouraged his sons to push themselves to learn more and more of the arcane arts. He started to believe that his powers rivaled, even surpassed that of Emperor Chris himself. So the Legion, now being free of the flesh-changed genetic mutations, were able to start rebuilding the Legion's numbers once again, and were soon able to rejoin the Great Crusade. I also have to mention that each of the Legionnaires also had a spirit animal of some kind that would occasionally bolster their powers a little bit. Now back fully on the offensive, they started to crush and conquer worlds using their psychic abilities, more than using conventional weapons, and Magnus's arrogance grew even more. Eventually, a few of the other Primarchs got together and petitioned Dad, aka Emperor Chris, to put a stop to the Librarius due to Magnus's reckless ways of trying to tame the powers of the Great Ocean. A big council was formed, called the Council of Nicaea, after the planet was held on, where both sides put forward arguments for and against the use of librarians in Space Marine legions. The initial arguments to stop them were compelling, but then Magnus was very convincing in his arguments for them. Just when it seemed he had this in his bag, during his closing statements, he basically said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Chill out, Dad. There's nothing in the Great Ocean I'm scared of. In fact, everything in there should be scared of me, because I is the best at being a space wizard." In which case, Emperor Chris face-palmed and realised this arrogant, reckless fuckwit of a gene child is going to cause major fucking problems later down the line, so he had no choice and banned the librarians. So all the librarians of each legion were sent back to their battle line units and were denied from using their psychic abilities forevermore, and they all complied. Except of course the Space Wolves, because they don't have librarians, they have wolf priests, and besides, the Space Wolves consider rules, edicts and laws more of a suggested guideline. When the Thousand Sons got back to their homeworld of Prospero, they were like, and again I'm paraphrasing here, "Okay Dad, what do we do now without our psychic powers?" And Magnus was like, "Well, just don't get caught." And they were like, "But Grandad Chris said no." And Magnus was like, "I know what he said, so like I said, don't get caught." So they carried on being space wizards, but were much more low-key about it. Then came the scouring of Ullanor, and as many of the legions and Primarchs gathered that could. Except the Space Wolves and Dark Angels, they had shit to do elsewhere. It was here that Emperor Chris announced he is leaving the Great Crusade and was returning to Earth for some super secret project he was working on, and named Horus the War Master, and that Horus was going to take over supreme control of the Great Crusade, which was nearly over at this point. This resulted in lots of Space Marines crying as Grandad Chris was going home, and a few jealous Primarchs because they didn't get the promotion. Fast forward a bit, and Horus gets wounded and is tempted by the Chaos Gods to save his life. Magnus projects himself into the Great Ocean and tries to convince Horus not to take the deal, but he fails miserably, and Horus fell to the Chaos Gods, starting the Horus Heresy. So with Horus's betrayal, Magnus decides he's going to again project himself into the Great Ocean so he can warn Emperor Chris personally of Horus's betrayal. Emperor Chris, however, has sealed himself inside his palace complex with powerful wards and psychic shields, so no psychic powers of any kind, including messengers, can get in. So then Magnus contacted every astropath in the area of Terra, and there is usually several on board every spaceship and several thousand in Terra's space at any one time. With enough of them all saying the same thing, that Horus has rebelled, someone would be able to carry a physical message into Emperor Chris's palace. Or at least that's what the fucking idiot should have done. But instead, Magnus is, as I have established, an arrogant fuckwit. So instead of doing that, he made a deal with the same power he made the deal with to stop the flesh change for a temporary boost in power, allowing him to shatter the shields around the palace. With the shields destroyed, demons immediately flooded the palace complex, and Emperor Chris was fucking furious. He silenced Magnus before he could speak easily, even though Magnus had a temporary buff, and Magnus at this point realised he had just destroyed Emperor Chris's super secret project and it was irrecoverable at this point. Magnus, like a scolded dog, realised how badly he had fucked up and retreated back to his body, awaiting Emperor Chris's punishment, which was obviously going to be the Space Wolves sent to spank him. Falling into a deep depression, he shut himself away and failed to tell his legion the Space Wolves were coming and that they would be pretty pissed off at what he'd done. So stay the fuck out of the angry wolves' way. Layman Ross and his Space Wolves, however, were ordered by the Emperor to bring Magnus to Terra alive. But Horus, at this point who had fallen, intercepted the orders and after a little chat with Layman, convinced him that his real job was to kill Magnus. And Layman was like, "If," as he had wanted to kick the fuck out of the red-skinned psyker for years. This led to the burning of Prospero, which is going to have to be covered in another video, but at the end of the fight, the power in the ocean that Magnus made a deal with offered him one more deal to save his legion, which he took, allowing the survivors and what was left of the last city on Prospero to be teleported to a planet in the Eye of Terror, and permanently boosting Magnus's power. And this deal permanently boosted Magnus's power levels, but the flesh change promptly went into overdrive and was killing all his surviving legionnaires. Now before Magnus could use his new powers, his first captain Ahriman cast his board wipe spell and turned all the low-level Psycho Marines accidentally into dust, infusing their souls into their armour, leaving them to be mind-controlled by their more powerful Psycho squad leaders. You see, it turns out the genetic flesh change wasn't a genetic mutation, it was then being turned into Chaos Spawn by the Chaos God Tzeentch, who was the power Magnus had been dealing with all along, showing just exactly how sneaky Tzeentch can be. It also turns out Magnus never beat the flesh change. Tzeentch just stopped doing it to make him feel powerful, and took his eye, so he always had a backdoor into Magnus's mind, adding to the fact he always had a backdoor into his legionaries' minds. You see, the great ocean that Magnus kept visiting was the war, and at this point Magnus realised he'd been played by Tzeentch since day one, and realising he would now never be able to redeem himself or his legion in the eyes of Emperor Chris, Magnus did the only thing he could left and surrendered fully to the will of Tzeentch, which was the plan of Tzeentch all along. If Magnus had only used some restraint, trusted Emperor Chris's will, and considered other options rather than brute forcing a psychic shield and not resigning his planet to the destruction of the wolves and just surrendering to laymen, the Thousand Sons would still be a loyal legion. So if you think Magnus did nothing wrong, you can fuck right off. Right, like I said, this is going to be a long one, so let's get into what's in the box. You get an Infernal Master, 5 Scarab Occult Terminators, and 20 Zangors. The Infernal Master is obviously the leader of your army, and is armed with an Inferno bolt pistol that is pretty crap, and a force weapon with 4 attacks at above average strength 6, the average being strength 4. Each attack has -1 to armor save and does D3 damage. So as always, he is way more potent in melee combat than he does when he's shooting. He does, however, have a shortish range psychic attack. Average for ranged attacks is 24 inches, this attack is only 18, but does between 2 to 6 attacks at a strength 6 with a -2 to save, but only 1 damage per attack. So not as powerful as melee, but better than most characters' ranged attacks we have seen so far. He does have the option of overloading that psychic attack to make it 2 to 12 attacks, but that runs him the risk of suffering up to 3 wounds, and he only has 4. He gets a 3+ save with a 5+ invulnerable on it, but he does have a surprisingly low toughness of only 4, which is the kind of average you would expect for most infantry, not for character units. Once per turn you can change a single dice roll he makes of either a hit, wound, damage or armor save to an unmodified 6. Remember, you can also use this ability in your turn and your opponent's. He also has the ability that when he is leading a unit, that unit's weapons get sustained hits 1, meaning for every 6 they roll to hit, they get an extra hit. So embed him in the Terminators, simple as that. Now the Scarab Occult Terminators are pretty much similar to their loyalist cousins, with an above average toughness 5, 2+ save or a 4+ invulnerable and 3 wounds each. Their combi bolters do 2 attacks at 24 inches and 4 attacks if the target is less than 12 inches. And if you have embedded the Infernal Master, every 6 you roll to hit gives you an extra hit. Also, while the Master is leading this unit, and or the squad leader is alive, on attacks that have strength 6 or higher that are attacking this unit, subtract 1 from the wound roll, making them very tanky, especially with that 4+ invulnerable. As they are all powerful psychers, at 18-inch range you can swap from firing the bolters to using their Warp Smite Psyker ability that has 3 attacks and -3 to save, so a little more powerful than the bolters. You get to equip one with a Hellfire Missile Rack. Do this as it has 2 attacks at a massive strength 10, -2 to save and 3 damage each. You then get to give one either a Heavy Flamer or a Soul Reaper cannon. Take the Soul Reaper, as it has 6 attacks at strength 6 and also causes devastating wounds, meaning every 6 you roll to wound, your opponent can't make an armor save. Also, if you're a long time viewer of my channel, you know how I feel about Flamers. Basically, I think they're shite in this game. Now finally we have our Zangors. Now these are a fairly new unit only popping up as of 8th edition, so I must admit they kind of slipped me by. There are that many factions and units I can't keep track of all of them, although I try my best. At first I assumed they were a new form of Tzeentch Lesser Demons, but no, they're just a form of Chaos Beastmen with either blue or purple skin, which are the main 2 colours of Tzeentch. They have to be in one big unit of 20, so with your Terminators and Leader in one unit, the enemy has to choose between the big unit of 20 or the little unit with Terminators that are tough to kill to target. They are all armed with an auto pistol which has all the range and stopping power of a Nerf gun, but if you're within 12 inches of an enemy, you might as well roll some dice. They're also equipped with Zangor blades, and you have the option of swapping any number of them to chainswords instead. There's pros and cons to both. The blades have 2 attacks at strength 5 with a -1 to save. The chainsword has 3 attacks at strength 4 and no modifier to save, so if you're up against weak mass infantry like Guard, Orcs or Tyranids, take the chainswords. You also get to equip one model with a Herd banner, allowing them to reroll battle shock tests, and a different model with the Brayhorn, allowing you to reroll advance and charge rolls. Definitely do this. Tactics are pretty simple. Use these as a meat shield to take incoming fire to protect your Lord and Terminators, who should be advancing up the field, allowing them to lay down some serious firepower before finally closing into melee combat towards the end of the game. Then when the Terminators are in melee combat, have the Zangors grab control points and or pick off weakened or nearly dead units. As for their unique rule, Cabal of Sorcerers, basically most infantry character units generate you some Cabal points at the end of each of your command phases that you can use to cast buffs with varying effects, from costing as little as 2 Cabal points to allow a single unit to reroll a single armor save, to the biggest at 9 points, which prevents an enemy unit making armor saves for the duration of that turn. Your leader generates you 2 per turn, the Terminator leader generates 1 per turn, and the Zangors have a 50-50 chance of gaining 1 if they control an objective point. So if you save them up by turn 3, you can unleash the big one and cause some major devastation on an enemy unit, as it's got no saving throws anymore. So what to add next? Well, definitely you want Magnus the Red, as he's just an absolute unit, because he is a demon Primarch. You can also add some Chaos Demons, and the only one to consider is the Greater Demon of Tzeentch, the Lord of Change. While not as devastating as the Khornite Bloodthirster, it is second on the power tier list. Now this is very much the ranged army, but characters, Greater Demons and Terminators can always go a few rounds in melee, so don't be afraid to get them stuck in if you have to. The Rubric Marines are pretty much equivalent to Space Marines, so a couple of squads of them would not go amiss, along with some more Scarab Terminators. After that you're primarily looking at vehicles. If your army is getting pounded in melee, then a couple of Mauler Fiends and Hellbrutes will certainly help mitigate that. The Vortex Beast, which is a stunning model, the Hellbrute and Defiler can do both melee and ranged very effectively. And then of course you have a selection of Predators and of course the Land Raiders. And you want to add a Land Raider, and say it with me folks, because Land Raiders are fucking cool. So just like the generic Chaos Marines and the World Eaters we previously looked at, most of the selections in this army list is its open season based on what you think looks good, as they are all very powerful units. Except the Cultists and the Zangors, stay away from them, and as soon as you have the models, drop the Zangors from your army list. Oh, and also, the Demon Prince has an impressive stat line, but its attacks are somewhat lacking, so I would avoid that. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's video. If you got this far, don't forget to leave a comment on what your favourite part was, and if you're not subscribed, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Better still, share this video with someone who could do with some Noob-Splaining in their life. And if you want a shout out, just hit me up on the email address that's in the video description. Doesn't cost you anything, but if you want to buy me a coffee, you can do. There's also the links in there for Baron of Dice to get yourself some custom 40k dice, and also for Element Games, where you can get discounts off all your wargaming gear. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.